This is my first video that I'm going to be uploading here, and I'm talking briefly about what it means to age and technologies that may soon exist. Maybe we're talking about the next 5 decades or so that will allow us to prevent aging, essentially treating aging and the aging process as no more than a side effect of the human condition, a side effect that we can treat. No different than a birth defect or any other human defect. And basically, the human body is made up of hundreds of trillions of cells. Within each one of these cells contained is a gene. Inside the gene are chromosomes, and at the very tips of each one of these chromosomes are something called a telomere. Now, to give you an idea of how small a telomere is, a chromosome is about, I think it's about 100 million in length. Let's say it's 100 million. It's made up of 100 million parts, right? Well, a telomere is made up of only about 15,000. So you can see that the ratio is a lot different there. It's a much smaller number. So we're talking about something that is very, very small, obviously, if it's at the very tips of the chromosome. Now, what happens with aging is what the theory is on what happens with aging and decay is that our telomeres, which are on the end of each chromosome again, that they gradually start to shorten, essentially separating from the other cells. Again, because you get the cell being the whole. Within the nucleus of the cell, you've got all these chromosomes, and they're floating around in there. They got skin cells and cells that make up our organs, and cells that make up our brain. So just put it in perspective, the brain. As we start to age, the brain breaks down. And what that means is that, and this is the theory, at least the ongoing theory, is that the telomeres are actually shortening, meaning that they're pulling away from the other, that your chromosomes are starting to pull away and the cellular structure starts to break down. And this usually starts happening in your late 30s, and with other cells it happens a little bit earlier, some as early as even in our teenage years. And such as regenerative tissues, those no longer function the same way that they would, and the same reason why a lot of our younger stem cells start to die off is because of the telomeres. And the theory is that that's why we don't contain a lot of the stem cells, which, if any of us remember our high school biology classes, are the cells, the infant stem cells are the ones, or the embryonic stem cells are the ones that have the ability to become anything else. Those are the ones that are with us when we're in the womb and become our limbs, that become our organs, that become our brain and skin. And those are the cells that can actually be reprogrammed or programmed, or they're programmed by our body or genome that could differentiate us in the very minute ways between us and, let's say, a chimpanzee. Because there's only a few differences between us and the chimpanzee. There's only like 3 or 4 genes that separate us from the average dog. There's only about a dozen genes that separate us between us and a house plant. All right. So stem cells are the ones that die off earlier, like the embryonic stem cells, and then you maintain your adult stem cells for things like, your skin being able to heal and other factors being able to fight off disease. All those different things are what stem cells are there for. But the theory is, in terms of what happens to us when we age, is that the telomeres actually shrink. They slow down in terms of their lengthening. In my story, Nano Nightfall, I utilize a early embryonic stem cell technology, a nano stem cell, artificially implanted stem cells in an embryo. And what those artificially inserted stem cells, nanocells, do is they replicate the abilities of the embryonic stem cells early on. They copy them and they replicate themselves using organic materials. And they populate each and every gene within, the gene, again, that contains all these chromosomes. They copy every single one of those genes, and they are able to replicate them themselves and even reprogram some of those genes within the cells. And the reason for that is that they maintain the status quo inside the cells. They get the cells up to their perfect point, maybe about 25 to 30 years of age, and they maintain it there. All right. If there's any cellular structural damage, then they will repair it. So the theory, again, and it's taking a while to get here, is that the telomeres are actually shrinking as we get older. And that's what causes the cellular breakdown and causes things like our skin to start to wrinkle, our organs to not function in the same way that they would have. And then 90 years from birth, they break down vital organs to a point where they no longer function. And that's where you have things like heart disease taking over, liver failure, kidney, renal failure. That's the theory on what happens to telomeres. It's not the same as, we'll get into in one of my upcoming videos, what is the ongoing theories about cancer. Obviously, cancer is when mitosis and cellular reproduction gets out of control. And my story and my protagonist, the technology that runs through his bloodstream, that runs through his body, that's in his genes, would be able to correct even something like that. And this technology isn't that far off. We have people that are working right now at MIT. There's a couple of other high-profile individuals. I'll put a link to some of those names in below, and you can do your own research. I appreciate you checking out this video on telomeres. Some pretty cool science. I mean, if we can treat death like a disease, then we may be able to potentially cure it. Alrighty. Signing out now. Nick, bye.